Oh, ready na?
Wait lang, sir. Kumain pa ata, sir, yung mag-i-intro po sa amin, sir.
Ano?
Yung mag-i-intro sa amin, sir.
O,
Hindi po,
nasaan?
sir. Andito po, sir.
Ay, andun na po pala.
Rinig po ba, sir?
Baka nagpapaganda pa ng boses ang voice over.
Hello, hello.
Wala sa bell na interest na. Ano ginamit ko? Oh, kanya hindi niya alam kung ano yung time na.
Ano na nangyari? Mark? Alan?
Start na po ba, sir?
Start na tayo.
Okay po, sir. Good evening po, sir. We are the third group and we are here to present the manufacturing process of beer. Next slide po. So, first of all, let's see the definition of a beer. Beer is a fermented beverage made from malted barley and flavored with hops. And hops is a type of a flower which add bitterness and act as natural preservatives, though other flavorings such as herbs or fruits may occasionally be included to make up with the flavor profile of the beer. Next po. Yung kanina, yeah. Beer is also the most popular alcoholic beverage in the world, which is the third most popular only behind water and tea.
Water and ano? Water and?
Tea po, sir.
Tea.
Pangatlo po siya sa pinakasikat,
Pangatlo yung
sir.
beer. Okay.
Beer has a long and storied history, and it has become an important part of many cultures. In Europe, beer is often served in traditional beer halls and pubs, where people gather and to socialize and enjoy a pint. In the United States, beer is often associated with sports, and many cities have their own local breweries. Beer is also a popular drink at festivals and other special occasions. In many countries, beer is an important part of the culture, and it is often seen as a symbol of friendship and camaraderie. Studies have shown that moderate beer consumption can reduce the risk of heart disease, stroke, and certain types of cancer. Beer is also high in fiber, which can help to improve digestion. Next slide po. And here is the list of the top 10 beer consuming countries. Naunguna po dyan yung Palau and most of the countries in Europe po, sir. Next slide.
So for history, sir, dito sa slide na to, makikita natin kung gaano katagal na iniinom yung beer. So it started from 9,500 BC. Beer is one of the oldest prepared beverage. So possibly dating back to 9,500 BC because some sources says that it started at around 10,000 BC, which is earlier. So cereal was first farmed and recorded in the written history of ancient Iraq and ancient Egypt. In 7,000 BC, a fermented beverage using rice and fruit was made in China. The rice was probably prepared by fermentation and mastication or malting. So the earliest known chemical evidence of barley beer dates to 3,500 to 3,100 BC from the site of Godin Tepe in Zagros Mountains of western Iran. Beer was spread through Europe by Germanic and Celtic tribes as back as 3,000 BC. So mapapansin natin na yung beer nag-originate siya dun sa ancient civilization na malolocate ngayon sa Middle East and Africa, which is Egypt, Iran, and Iraq. Next slide. 2500 BC, the Ebla tablets discovered in Syria dates back to 2500 BC, revealed that the city produced a range of beers, including one that appears to be named Ebla after the city. So in 7th century AD, nag-spread na yung beer sa Europe. Tapos it was being sold by European monasteries. In 1516, yung pinakaunang batas na food regulation inadopt by William IV of Bavaria. So yung batas na yan, nagiging basis pa rin ngayong 21st century. Na ang beer, ang allowed ingredients lang ay water, hops, and barley malt. Tapos,
Ano ba
industry,
ano yung Bavaria? Ano sa English yung Bavaria?
Bavaria, sir, ano po yan? Parang state siya dati na, alam ko, sir, malolocate siya ngayon sa Germany.
Kaya nga, yung Bayern yan, Bayern, capital Munich, Bayern, no? Diyan yung mga maraming beer manufacturing. Bayern, no? Kasi Bavaria, ano yan, German yan eh. Sige, nabanggit ko lang. Bayern.
Tapos, Industrial Revolution, sir, yung beer, dati kasi, sir, di ba, nung wala pa yung mga makina, mano-mano siya binuburo sa mga crates. So, nung nag-start yung Industrial Revolution, machines na ang ginagamit pang brew ng beer. Next slide. Oh. So yan, the brewing industry is a global business consisting of several dominant multinational companies and many thousands of smaller producers, ranging from brew pubs to regional breweries. So dito sa atin, ang pinakamatandang brewery is San Miguel Corporation. Tapos ang ano yun, sir, yung San Miguel Corporation, bali, na-establish siya during 1890s.
Yung San Miguel?
During the Apo, sir.
Spanish, ah.
During the Spanish era. Tapos ang pangalawa naman na pinakasikat na brewery dito sa atin is Asia Breweries.
Okay.
Which is owned by Lucio Tan. So, bali yung
ano,
dalawa.
Red Horse, di ba?
Red
Ano
Horse,
siya?
sir, sa San Miguel, sir.
San Miguel ba yung Red Horse?
Opo, sir. Tapos yung sa Asia Brewery po, sir, yung beer na beer.
Beer na beer. Ah, okay.
Next slide.
Lusyutan eh. Yung may-ari ng UE, Lusyutan eh. Di ba?
Ingredients. Water. Wait lang sir, maingay dito. Wait lang. Ingredients. Water comprises more than 90% of beer. In the past, mineral content of water influenced greatly in flavor of the final beer and was specific to the region of the earth from which it came. Second, malted grain. The most common starch source used in a beer is malted grain. The grain is malted by soaking it in water, allowing it to begin germination and then drying partially germinated grain in the clean. Malting grain produce enzymes that convert starch in the grain into fermentable sugar. 3 hops. Cumulus lupulus are a flowering grain whose flower are used as a preservative and for their essential oils that add flavors, bitter hops and aroma hops to balance the sweetness of malt. Yeast. Yeast is a microorganism that is responsible for fermentation in beer. Yeast metabolizes the sugar extracted from grains, which is produce alcohol and carbon dioxide and thereby turns wort into beer. Next slide. Ito po yung dalawang kategory ng beer, lager category tsaka ale category. Sa lager category po, American style pale, lager, pilsen, light lager, dark lager. Tapos sa ale po, ale, porter, tsaka stout.
Lager ba yung basa dyan? Baka lager. Di ba? Lager yata yan. Lager ba ang basa dyan?
Ata, sir, German eh.
Pag sa German, lager yan eh. Ibig sabihin storage, lager. Lager, oh. Lager yung basa dyan. Sige, tuloy lang, tuloy lang. Oh, nasa na? Mark, ay sino nang magpe-present?
Process of making beer. Una is malting. Next slide. Malting is the process of converting barley or other cereal grains into malt for use in brewing, distilling, or in foods and take place in malting, or sometimes called a maltose or a malting floor. The malting process starts with drying the grains to a moisture content below 14%, and then storing for around 6 weeks to overcome seed dormancy. When ready, the grain is immersed or steeped in water 2 or 3 times over 2 or 3 days to allow the grain to absorb moisture to start to sprout. When the grain has a moisture content of around 46%, it is transferred to the malting or germination floor where it is constantly turned over the around 5 days while it's air dried. Next slide po. The spag barley is clean dried by spreading it on a perforated wooden floor smoke and coming from on casting fireplace. It's then used to heat the wooden floor and the sprouted grains. The temperature is usually 55 degree up to 85 degree. Pale and pistol. Next slide.
The next process is milling. It is the physical act of crushing malt kernels into small particles para sa preparation ng next stages of the brewing process. The most common type of mill found at breweries is a roller mill, which is itong nasa taas. So essentially, pakibalik po sa milling. Essentially, ito ay kernel. Ang process nito ay, as the grain passes through, yung rollers press and shear each kernel na nag-a-allow sa access to the endosperm or yung pinaka-seed ng malt while leaving the husk or yung balat ng seed or dry outer cover. Then the various milling processes need to be manipulated carefully to find a balance between a grind that is too fine and one that is too coarse. Kapag mas pino daw yung pagka-crush ng grind, pagka-crush or pagka-grind sa seed, the greater will be the amount of sugary worth that can be extracted from a given amount of waste or yung grain that is ground to make flour. I-add ko lang na it has two different types, the dry milling and wet milling. Ang pinagkaiba lang niya, yung dry milling, common siya and simple lang siya gamitin at madali. Ang kaso lang, ang problema sa kanya, it generates dust. It's the flour with imminent hazard of explosive ignition. Tapos yung milling naman, the malt is steeped or sinusok siya sa large quantities of warm water in degrading operation. Tapos ginagawa to para ma-raise yung moisture content nung malt up to 15%. Ang disadvantage lang niya is yung wet mill ni and may high chance of mold and other contaminants sa pag... Next slide. Next slide. Next slide po. Sa afternoon meeting. Ayan. Thank you.
Para pagkikita namin na sir, hindi na lang po kami papasok sa
Hindi ba gumagalaw?
So the third process is mashing. Mashing is the start of the brewing process.
Makasalawa ng offset ko lang isa.
Baka sa akin. Ay, okay. Mashing is the start of the brewing process.
Of every coordination to
Mashing is the start. Mashing is the start of the brewing process. Grains are mixed with water to form a porridge-like mixture. The mash. It is the
Mashing, ano na?
and proteins na nagke-create ng sweet fermentable liquid called the the mash is then sprayed with hot water called sparging at about 75 degrees Celsius or 1 runs through the mash and out the mash tun. Yung nakikita sa picture ay yung mash tun. Through the bottom of mash tun or yung natawag na slatted false bottom. Taking with it all liquid that the yeast will ferment into beer. So, yung tawag dyan is the infusion. Yung infusion mash will yung ginagamit, which is 75 degrees Celsius. Tapos ito yung mash tun, yung nakikita nyo sa picture. Ayan siya. Yung equipment kung saan malt is being mashed. Kung saan loob yan, this worth prior to fermentation. Thank you.
Lattering. Lattering is the separation of the wort from the grains. After ng mashing is imomove yung mash sa latter tun. Latter tun yung pangalan ng vessel na nagsiseparate ng sweet wort or sugar water from the solid mash. Ang ginagawa nito ay pag...
Ano yung wort, ano? Ano ba yung wort? Dahon ba yun? Parang...
ano po siya, sir? Parang siya po yung sweetening material po ng para sa beer.
Yung wort?
Opo.
Okay.
Ang ginagawa nito ay paggaling kasi sa mash, yung liquid is very cloudy. Kaya ang gagawin nito ay i-recirculate niya yung liquid to the screen, put it back up on the top of the grain bed, and ginagawa niya ito para ma-clarify yung liquid in order for the liquid to be clear. Tapos yung boiling naman po, the beer must come to rolling boil. Kaya sa mga sinaunang panahon or sa mga ibang parts ng mundo, mas safe inumin ang beer kaysa sa tubig. Dahil binaboil yung beer through na-sterilize ang beer, and addition sa pag-sterilize ng wort, binaboil nito yung ibang water na nagiging more concentrated ang beer, and after that, dun sa ilalagay na hops, yung hops ay yung spice ng beer na nagbibigay ng bitter na lasa ng beer. Yun yung
Mm.
ginagawa na pang-balance ng sweetness ng wort. Depende sa manufacturer kung gaano karami ang ilalagay nilang hops para ma-determine kung gaano ka-bitter yung beer.
Mm. So mas safe pa yung mas safe pa yung beer kaysa tubig, 'di ba noon? Kasi wala pa
Opo,
namang
sir.
mineral noon eh. Mm.
Yes po, sir. Kasi na-sterilize po siya gamit po
Sterilized.
pagbo-boil.
Namatay yung bakterya, no?
Opo.
Mm.
Yun lang po. Thank you po.
Yun lang, tapos na.
Next process po, yung weir pooling. At the end of the boiling process, yung solid particles is separate dun sa wort gamit yung whirlpool or settling tank. The principle in all is that by swirling the wort, the centripetal force will push the trough into a cone at the center of the bottom of the tank where it can be easily removed. Next po, yung cooling. After the wort is boiled, it will be very hot and needs to be cooled before the yeast can be added and the fermentation process can begin. The clarified wort will pass through the heat exchanger to the fermentation tank, depending on the beer style. The wort cools quickly to 7 to 35 degrees Celsius as it passes through the heat exchanger. The working principle of the heat exchanger is that the cold water passes through the cold water side of the heat exchanger and the wort enters from the hot water inlet on the other side. And then the cold water will take away the heat in the wort. Although the cold water cooled the wort, they did not touch it. Yun lang po, sir.
Okay.
So the next is the fermentation. After being cooled in the heat exchanger, the wort is transferred to the fermentation tank. At this stage, the brewer chooses a specific strain of yeast and introduce it to that tank. This is where the most important stage of the brewing process takes place. Well, as the yeast consumes the sugars in the wort and converts them into alcohol and carbon dioxide, the fermentation process typically lasts for 10 days, during which the wort transform into beer, katulad nga nung mga nabanggit kanina. The unique strains of yeast used by each brewery largely contribute to the distinct characteristics of flavor of the beer. So, bali may 6 na steps, important keynotes para sa fermentation. One is the yeast selection. The first step in fermentation is to select the appropriate yeast strain for the beer style being brewed. Different yeast strains produce different flavors, aromas, and alcohol levels. So choosing the right strain is important for achieving the desired final product. Next is the pitching. To begin the process of fermentation, the appropriate type of yeast, the selected yeast strain is then added to the wort, which has been cooled to the ideal temperature range for fermentation. The yeast begins to consume the sugar present in the wort, producing alcohol and carbon dioxide as byproducts. Next is itong fermentation. During the fermentation process, the yeast consumes the sugar in the wort and multiplies, creating a layer of foam. So the term for this is creusen. So the yeast also produces various flavors and aroma compounds which contributes the overall taste of the beer. Next is the temperature control. For the temperature control, the aspect of fermentation as different yeast strains have different temperature requires for optimal fermentation. So the next is the conditioning. Well, once the fermentation is complete, the beer is conditioned or allowed to rest for a period of time. This allows the yeast to settle out and any remaining sugars to be consumed. And the final step is the packaging that will be discussed later. So as for the summary for the fermentation, fermentation is a complex process that is critical to producing high quality beer. Careful attention to yeast selection, temperature control, and conditioning can help to create unique and delicious beers with a variety of flavors and aroma profiles. So the next is finishing and packaging.
Hello, sir. So
Hello.
for the next part of this process is the finishing and packaging. Finishing is the last step in the brewing process. Here, the beer is filtered and carbonated. By further filtering, gives the beer a sparkling clarity. The beer is then moved to a holding tank where it stays until it is bottled, canned, or put into kegs. Kegs means small barrel, especially one of less than 30 gallons. And filling techniques are used to ensure air does not come into contact with the beer and cannot be trapped within the container. Packaging is putting the beer into the containers in which it will leave the brewery. Typically, this means putting the beer into bottles, aluminum cans, and kegs, but it may include putting the beer into bulk tanks for high volume customers. These bottle cans and kegs are some of the commonly used for beer packaging solutions. These products are manufactured using materials such as metal, polyethylene terephthalate, PET, and glass. Beer packaging is widely used to prevent spillage, retain quality, provide protection against moisture, and contamination. As compared to other traditional packaging, beer packaging is hygienic, aesthetically pleasant, and exhibits higher insulation, durability, cost-effective, and good barrier properties. Besides this, several breweries utilize manual filling processes for beer packing, whereas machine-controlled packaging lines are used in massive breweries. Next slide, please. Isa pa, Ter. Isa pa.
May video ba? May video kayo?
Sir, wala nang time eh. Yung last part na lang sana. Isa ano na lang po. Problems encountered by the beer industries. Contamination problem and failure of temperature measuring device. Sa contamination problem, unintended beer contamination, whether by bacteria or fungi, it becomes a pervasive problem. Or in other term po is kumakalat for the brewing industry. Infected beer can result in many undesirable outcomes from slow to attenuate brews. Apparent attenuate, ibig po sabihin nun is yung pag-decrease ng specific gravity ng wort or yung plant na ginagamit during fermentation. Hanggang sa maging unsellable na po ito due to unsatisfactory sensory qualities. Tapos sa failure of temperature measuring device, sabi nga daw po kanina, since may range ang temperature ng pagpa-ferment ng yeast, and kapag hindi nasunod or naging out of range yung temperature ng yeast, hindi ito magpo-form. So magre-result to sa lack of production ng beer. Yun lang po. Ang tanong, sir, kailan tayo mag-beer?
Kailan tayo inom? Yung ano, i-present mo muna yung video.
Sir, time na eh. May oras pa ba, sir?
Anong time na ba? Anong oras ba tayo?
Ay, 9 pala.
Galas 9 pa tayo eh. Pag umuwi tayo, di nasita tayo.
Sige, sir.
Yan.
Sorry wala, sir. Alam tayo.
Pag madali ka umuwi eh. Galas 9 pa tayo eh. Ba't walang sound? I-tab mo kaya, tab.
Dito
Sa
na lang
YouTube.
sa i-present. Ito na lang po.
Pag sa YouTube, tab na lang.
Yes, sir.
Kasi pag ano, nakawala yung sound eh.
Kita na po ba, sir?
Wala pa.
Ancient people brewed this flavorful beverage with malted barley and hops. Today we use much the same ingredients to make beer, but with a production technology that's miles ahead.
Nakasan mo kaya yung volume? Nakatodo na ba yung volume mo?
Nakatodo na, sir.
O sige.
Beer has been drunk since 4000 BC in Mesopotamia. The Sicaru made it as a sacred beverage from grains but without hops. The Gauls and the Celts drank a beverage made with barley, wheat, and rye. During the Crusades, Europeans discovered spices and flavored the beverage with cinnamon and laurel. In the 15th century, Nordic peoples used hops as a spice, giving rise to the beer that we know today. Beer is a fermented beverage made with cereals and water. The barley used in making beer comes from the western provinces, with the malting being done elsewhere. The company has its own water filtration plant. It will be refiltered before being used to eliminate chlorine. This materials tank can hold 80,000 liters of water. Between 10 and 15 tons of malt and another grain are added. They use dark malt, which has been heat treated to a high temperature. The preparation will spend 2 hours here. An agitator prevents malt husks from settling to the bottom of the tank. Turbulence from the pumps during the transfer causes the formation of this protein foam. The wort is in the process of being extracted and will be boiled. About 5 hours have passed since the brewing process began. Here they draw off a sample since they'll make other control tests at various stages of brewing. This is the draff, a solid residue extracted from the wort. It will later be used as cattle feed. Here's a close-up view of the draff. Then the liquid is filtered. Here's the filtration tank where the wort is separated from the malt husks. A sample is withdrawn from the wort heater to verify the density of sugars and the quality of the wort. Now another ingredient, the hops, is added into the wort heater. The hops impart the bitterness and aroma particular to beer. The hops looks like this. Now they can start the brewing. In the control room, an operator handles the data control system of the brewing process. They add in the yeast, which starts off the fermentation, a process that lasts between 7 and 10 days. This foam indicates that fermentation has begun, and sugars will now transform into alcohol. Each fermentation tank is computer controlled to maintain a specific temperature. During fermentation, chemical reactions create the scum that we see. Now aged for 3 weeks, the beer is almost finished. We see here the bottling tanks. The beer has to be filtered once more. Exiting these filters, the wort is clarified, then rid of the components responsible for the cloudiness of the beer. Here's the beer filtered a second time, and finally finished as a clear product. Used bottles are now washed. After their wash cycle, the bottles have become sterilized. Empty bottles arrive on this plate, ready to be filled. About 1,000 bottles a minute are filled while on the move. Then they pass to the capper before being sent to the pasteurizer for pasteurization. Only 2 steps remain. Labels are glued onto the bottles, then they're sent by the conveyor to be put into cases. Made from water and cereal grains, the beer is now ready to be consumed and enjoyed.
Yun lang po yung summary ng process namin, sir.
Sa beer. Okay na yun, okay na
Opo,
yun.
sir.
Oh, very good. Excellent, no. Paki-forward yung yung mga PPT sa email ko sa UE. Sa
Sige
email
po,
ha.
sir.
Sige. Okay.
Thank you po.
Oh, isunod na yung sunod na yung soda. Tapos pahinga na tayo. Yung mag-report sa soda. Soft drinks manufacturing.